Welcome to Herd Mentality, a podcast where we discuss how the power of audio moves minds and markets. I'm Brittany Rigby, Managing Editor at Little Black Book, and each episode I sit down with creative thinkers, marketers, and makers to explore how the world's most creative brands use audio to make people think, feel, and act. Today I'm joined by Stuart White, Head of Marketing for a brand with one of the catchiest sonic hooks in Australia, Sushi Hub. Then there's a man who knows the power of sound like no other, singer, songwriter, actor, and the Head of Music and Innovation at Uncanny Valley, Charlton Hill. Welcome to you both.
Welcome. Hey, Britt. Thank you.
Charlton, I'm going to start with you. We always talk about branding visually, and yet not nearly as much about sonic branding. How do people respond differently when they hear a brand versus when they see it?
Firstly, in my neck of the woods, we talk a lot about sound and branding. So, I guess, look, to answer your question, the visual side of things, I guess, is always so apparent to people. If you're seeing signs, you're seeing images on television, etc., and on screens. But yeah, look, sonically speaking, the power of sound, in terms of complementing visual branding is intense. And we talk about earworms and the idea of something sort of getting in our mind and actually sort of, recurring in a certain way, but often based on repetition, which Stuart would have to say something about in terms of, how much you've got to actually get your sound out there and heard. But the minute people hear something and associate it with a brand, I mean, it runs a lot deeper in terms of their recall, the way they feel about the brand, and yeah, just the brand values as well. I think that can be imbued into sound, and that complements the brand. So yeah, it's critical part of marketeering, and it's a lot of fun too in terms of the stuff we get to do.
I imagine as well that when you get a brand sound right, it makes the visual branding work harder too. You see a TV ad and you know that the jingle's coming before you get to the end of it.
Absolutely, and I think once you've effectively created a sonic brand, then of course you can start to have fun and lean less on the visual. Obviously, in radio, streaming, podcasts, you've got no visual, so you have to sort of have something which can be triggered when you're driving, when you're in another room. If you hear something from coming off a screen from another room and you already know what the brand is, I think you're miles ahead in terms of capturing people's attention, making them feel a certain way towards your brand. So yeah, I mean, it's just incredibly powerful, and there's a lot to be said about using it correctly as well. I think Stuart and I were having a little chat together before the podcast in the hall about how some brands will attempt to have a sonic brand, but then not follow through with the repetition required. Maybe it's not used in the right way. It's also getting quite saturated out there as well in terms of just, hey, let's knock 3 notes together and whack it on the end of our brand. It's like, that's not going to cut it. So it's a science, and you've got to dive pretty deep into the brand and a lot about it, as you would with vision,
Stuart, speaking of science and jingles, yours is pretty catchy, pretty memorable.
Sushi Hub, Sushi Hub, that's a sushi that I like. So fresh, so good, so eat now. Sushi Hub.
At what point did Sushi Hub decide to spend a chunk of its budget on audio, and why did you decide a jingle was right?
It probably came at a time where Sushi Hub had grown to a certain level. So Sushi Hub will have, at the end of this year, 200 stores nationally, all states, all territories. 2014 was where they went to air the first time, and they probably, by the time 2016, when they got out of that first jingle, which is has been surpassed, they probably around about 50 stores plus, and so they've grown exponentially in the subsequent years. And so it was that stage where there was enough traction that you could do it. There's no point in, well, although I shouldn't really say that, because Lord knows some of the stations I listen to, they're doing ma and pa stores with one physical outlet, and they're promoting it. But of course, all of these places generally have an online opportunity, which of course wasn't the opportunity then. So it helped put flesh onto it. If you look at the QSRs nowadays, and if you look in the space of the sushi space there's nothing that distinguishes them particularly. I mean, I could do the Pepsi test, and go around and taste them and have my own view. But it's always going to be subjective as to which makes a better sushi. I mean, my view is Sushi Hub makes a better sushi because its tagline is about freshness and consistency. So they make all day, not just in the morning, and sell it all day, every day. And so when they do things with this jingle now behind it, so as Charlton was saying, it does come down to frequency. So it depends what your buy is going to be as well. But it's certainly got pester power as far as children go. So if we are,
My daughter loves your song, by the way, as do I. We sing it in the car
while they're eating something else.
No.
So if Sushi Hub does a number of things that they're experiential and they drive it to put flesh on the bones of the brand. So they will be at the Easter show or the Melbourne show or the Adelaide show or so forth. And they will have outlets there. And they will also have their characters which they've developed, which are now, at this particular time when the podcast first comes out, will be Sushi Hub's 19th birthday. So they have a collectible figurine. So they have those in human form. And then they do workshops in shopping centres because they have relationships, obviously, with the shopping centres they're in, which is of interest to the shopping centre because they're always trying to get people in and keep them there during holidays. And so this is not just a piece of sushi. This is one that they made and they know how they make. So, and as soon as they start up, the kids are already burst into song. They know what they're eating. It's not one down the road. It's not a Macca's or whatever it is, which, as Charlton and I discussed, there is no jingle that goes in there. There's no QSR brand out there that's got something that's memorable. And then if you look at the, as I said, certainly if you buy, you can have the frequency. But if you listen to the Sushi Hub jingle, it's almost in a cycle of 7 seconds. So in that 30-second space, you'll hear that 3 times.
And your competitors, they're not just fellow Japanese restaurants. Like if you're trying to grab, whether it's a mum and dad trying to figure out what to order for dinner or pick up for dinner, or as you said, you're in a supermarket, you're in a shopping centre, and you are deciding out of all the options what to grab for lunch, you're up against some behemoths. So how and why was audio the way to cut through and to start to build those memory structures?
It was affordable. So it's affordable and you can do deals and then you can work with it. And radio has always been theatre of the mind. So you have to conjure the pictures or not. We hadn't got pictures at this stage. So we subsequently have animations which kind of dovetails with the sound of the jingle. But it does give you cut through. And as I said, the other QSRs, the quick service restaurants, are the big behemoths as you describe them. They invariably lock into a period of time. You can only have a McBreakfast at that time, and then the meters shut off. Like falling down. Like you want to. So you physically. And so they'll drive them specific food at specific times. So they're very, very tactical in how they're using it. So ours is more generic and it's more brand building.
Could you talk a bit more about the results that it's driven for you? You mentioned growing from 50 stores in 2014 to about to open 200 stores. It's chasing that billion-dollar valuation. Just what types of results has that brand building driven?
It just as exactly what you said. It is Sushi Hub would be the largest sushi brand in Australia, and it's consistent. And it's only ever, I think, closed 2 stores. One was because the lease ran out and they pulled the building down, and the other one it just kind of didn't work anymore because things had shifted. Otherwise, they're very good at picking where they should be, and they work it. And the food is consistent. So pretty well, if you go from one store to another, it'll be the same. So you're not going to get a surprise and go, oh, that's a better one, go to that one.
Consistent store experience,
yeah.
Consistent.
And then that also comes down to service. So, like we have a whole department that looks after people who ring up or sending emails or whatever saying, I didn't like this, or have you got another one of those, or why don't you do such and such? And all of it's taken on board.
It's that classic thing that if you don't have a great product to advertise, the advertising isn't going to work. Start with the product and then advertise the hell out of it.
That's right. But also make it available. So the fact is, as we said, once we got to about critical mass of 50 stores, it made sense because you'll find one. So we're sitting in a studio in the heart of CBD, and you could find a sushi, one of probably 12 sushi stores within a 10-minute walk.
Yeah, wow. Charlton, you've worked for a whole range of cultural institutions, Sydney Opera House, Fox Sports, the ABC. When it comes to starting a project, where do you start? How do you try and start to unpick what a brand should sound like?
It's an interesting question. I think the first thing we do is look at the brand and try and have no preconceptions as to what it is. You know, if I felt a certain way myself about the brand, I kind of try and throw that away and just sort of come at the brand cold and sort of then look at what is out there in the space around them. You know, obviously with Stuart talking about competitors, things like that. I mean, you need to know what everyone else is doing at the same time. What's the message that they're trying to get across? Because sometimes there's it could be incongruous. They're saying one thing in print and visually, but then trying to achieve something else, and the music's not carrying through on that. So assess where they've been. You know, a lot of brands might have attempted to have had a sound previously. What music have they been using? Because, you know, if it's not actually a sonic brand or a sting, maybe they've just been using a track or licensing a song that everyone holds synonymous with the brand. So just really do an absolute deep dive on the brand, and that's the same for a very commercial brand or a food brand, or all the way to doing a lot of work with the ABC, as you mentioned, and trying to understand the messaging. So I guess it's just a lot of talking to people, do our own sample group in terms of what other people think about the brand. Sometimes the brand will come to us with sort of marketing research, of course, as well, that we sort of need to really understand. So it's probably the most important and enjoyable part of our job, is actually sort of really looking at a brand from a marketeering perspective, but then sort of sitting back in the studio and saying, well, how are we going to help that along? And then I guess it goes into a brief document, and then we push and pull at that, play devil's advocate with other ideas, wildcard ideas, which sometimes, and to get up, they started with this idea, but then we played around with 3 to 5 other ideas, and they went, wow, that one was the one that really resonated with us, and they often surprise themselves with what we might come back with. But then there's discussions around, obviously, the palette, the sound that you'll be hearing, if it's instrument based, then what sort of instruments. Some instruments are tropes for certain feelings. If you do news, there has to be brass and strings in there, and you have to decide how you're going to use them. But if you stray from those kind of tropes, people will say that doesn't feel very newsy, and you're like, yeah, I know, because unless someone comes to say we want to break the mold on news, like maybe the BBC did sort of a decade ago, where they sort of went from something quite pompous and they decided they were going to go in a kind of a soft electronic kind of way. It's like, oh my God, wow, what a moment in British history, but it was very definitive choice to go
put the
to
kettle
that.
on.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a real deep dive.
So you're thinking about category tropes, whether to follow them, and whether you're building the category whilst also building the brand, or whether to break them. Is it often that a brand has used sound before and it's kind of worked, but they didn't see it through and push it hard enough? Or have they had a crack, not done a great job of it, and it's often dismissing what they've tried before and starting from scratch when you do that audit? Yeah,
it can be all those things. I mean, again, Stuart and I were talking before about the repetition required and the commitment from a brand to go with a sonic brand. And if the results aren't great first year, then okay, you look at things, say, well, is it the sound of the thing, or did we put it out there enough, or did we put it out in the right space? Sticking to it. Sometimes you'll get a change of creative department, and they'll come in and just go, oh, I don't like that song, we're not going to use that song anymore. And you go, hang on, is it a bad song, or is it being
the new broom?
Yeah, happens a lot. But I guess it's other variables as well. I think sonically we'll do a lot of revamping an existing motif. So, you mentioned McDonald's before. I guess it was a while before they strayed from sort of, using, I think it was probably a whistle. A whistle was probably the early days of that. There were probably incarnations before that, I can't remember, but then they start saying, okay, let's use a guitar if it's about a rock band in the script or something like that.
Matcha is here.
But you shouldn't, and I'd recommend you shouldn't stray from the sonic palette of something for a long time, because you're assuming that someone has that motif in their mind, and then you're allowed to do that and you can have fun with it. But it takes quite a while for something to be sort of synonymous with a brand from a sonic perspective.
Because if you've embedded it enough, then you've only got to regurgitate it again. I mean, it's like all the Marvel films, basically you know who Superman was, they go back and they reinvent it, whatever, but they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So the classic ones that I'd pull out of those were of course, Aeroplane Jelly. and
Tip Top,
Vegemite.
Yeah.
So they came in like 1937 was aeroplane jelly, and 57 was Vegemite.
There's one thing we all agree on. We love our Vegemite.
And then they went out of favour. So somebody's declared that this is not funky anymore, and then they funk it up again so they could redo it, and then generations would remember it. And particularly that's in FMCG. So you've got families who bought this as a grocery item, so they can come back to it. There may be other things, but they knew that this one always worked, and my mother had it, my grandparents had it. So some of those work, and some people come back and invent them, and we certainly haven't. We're not at the end of this one. This one works for us well. We like it.
All the while, if you put a sort of sleigh bells on yours during Christmas period, that isn't breaking the mold very much. You know, same song, whack a sleigh bell on it, and go, oh, great, okay, it's a festive offer.
It's Christmas, yeah.
You know.
It's very true, and of course it now lent itself to animation. So the animation's very sort of naive style, but it tells the story of our characters who we sort of are building, and it gives that other dimension. But we don't sit on big budgets, so the animation's not television; it's cinema, and it obviously has the Sushi Hub jingle, which is all about radio.
I mean, the other thing to your point about trendiness is that if competitors have pulled back, or the category is mainly investing in this channel over here and not so much sonically, it leaves some white space. And to your point around taking a while for a brand to feel synonymous with a sound, I used to work at DDB that had, we had Maccas for 50 years, and that ba-da-da-ba-bum is so synonymous with that brand that, close to, if not in the 50th year, they handed over that sound, that sting to a bunch of creators and had them remix it and sing it and do all sorts of things with it, which engages a fandom around a thing that they already know and feels culturally relevant and feels part of their lives. But it took 50 years to get there locally.
Yes, it's like when a brand becomes synonymous with a verb to hoover something or to
become generic.
Yeah, it's actually you'd say actually what does that even mean, that word? It's like it's the one brand.
Well, it's the same as like they're happy little Vegemite, and that's in the vernacular now.
Yeah.
You're saying everybody's satisfied with the situation, and you're trying to explain that to somebody from a different culture. They don't understand what you're talking about. But then you're not going to get them to eat Vegemite either, for that matter.
Yeah, Charlton, you as a singer know, I'd hope / assume a fair bit about culture and about a creative process. How is there a formula to this is what you have to do to have the best shot at a thing feeling less like a commercial and more like part of culture, to the point about the Vegemite jingle, the aeroplane jelly jingle, the Macca's sting?
It's a really interesting question, because I grew up at a time when jingles were everywhere on television. Mo and Joe and all the great songs of the 80s, when I was sort of in my younger years and 90s into my teens and things like that. Again, holding those songs synonymous with the brands that you loved. And you could say, well, at that time, what did it mean to be a young person in Australia watching commercial television? Well, if you could sing all the songs and do all the things and whatever, that you're a part of culture. Every kid at school knew, or there'd be a competition where again, I guess we're referring to McDonald's, but they had a thing with the all beef patties where you had to say the thing all the way through, and if you could do it, you're a legend on the school bus. I think you won a prize, or you got something, you got a free burger if you could go in and do it at the store. So it's a wonderful engagement for sort of kids at the time. But to your point, I think that particularly mentioning those guys and the advertising campaigns of that age. They had a way of actually making a part of a new Australia at the time. I guess it feels hard. I could be wrong, but it feels harder. Sort of with the advent of the internet, that sort of the globalization of sound and marketeering, everything else. You're getting sort of hit from all angles with so many different things. I guess culture at worst is being sort of watered down. And that might not be fair, but I think in the kind of in the streaming space, it's you probably have to work harder now to maybe do something which is definably Australian, because I think things are becoming homogenized. But I think we should continue to try really hard, and it starts with what is local music, live music, all the things that are really important to a culture. You know, if we know what our sound is and our feel is, then we can start to play with some of those ideas or tropes again, because they feel like the modern version of what was happening in the 80s and 90s. But I think, you know, good brands are doing that. They're finding it, particularly if they're Australian brands, and they really want to lean on that. You know?
Yeah, I think it's very true that because you mentioned before with the McDonald's Sting. So Toyota's got a Sting. They've got Stings, but not a jingle. And then, as you say, here's a button, sew a shirt on it. I've got a Sting. Let's make a music out of it. And then that's when everybody gets in and changes it around. But that's such a memorable Sting, as is the Toyota is a Sting. But I mean, if you look at the ones, Cats of Australia, that made their choice. I mean, that was another one. Suzuki 4-wheel drive, and 4-wheel drive, that was Heckendorf and Keith Potka. And Cats of Australia made their choice. That was Andrew Killy and Idris Jones. Idris Jones was famous for the bicycle song, and they sang. And as you know, as you were just saying, is that the things you sang on the bus, they made you Australian. But you know, television was much more invasive then, and so these were television things more so than the ads. Again, it's sort of like television ads before they came together and worked the two together.
And Stuart, they always used an Australian accent.
Yes,
you know, quite a strong one. You know what I mean? Whereas I hear American accents on Australian radio, and I don't actually know why. And I don't mean just a particular DJ who's got an American accent. I'm talking about ads with a really heavy sort of, you know, LA style accent. I understand it's kind of, it's making something desirable from a not here over there thing, if kind of, you know, youth culture is so fascinated with perhaps what's coming out of LA or the States. But yeah, you know, I think some of those small decisions when it comes to owning an accent, owning elements of our culture, and then imbuing sort of marketeering with it. I think it's just as important as a TV show or a film or you know, a hit song.
Mm.
That's so interesting, because you hear chief creative officers talking so much about ideas that travel globally or ideas that can stand up globally, and even if they feel really local, how do you get cut through with global juries? And I wonder if we're not thinking enough about, even if the idea itself can travel and feel global, that certain elements or channels have to feel local. And yeah, I mean, the people listening to your ad on the radio in the car are going to be people who live here and engage with your brand here.
Yeah, and I guess there's that objective of, is it, you know, does it need to feel like it's sort of international or something, and so therefore you would imbue it with sound and an accent that maybe wasn't local. So I guess it does come down to brand objectives. But I've just been in the States for about a month, and part of what I love about traveling is sort of looking back at Australia and sort of feeling, well, what is Australia, you know? And then you obviously see the way that, particularly, you know, in the States they refer to Australia, and it's still dangerous animals, and you know, the Irwins doing a fabulous job of promoting that sort of wild of Australia, and I love that. But in the same way, you kind of want to defend Australia constantly and say, no, we've got, you know, it's a huge breadth of culture, and you're only just scratching at the surface, kind of thing. But no, to your point, I guess, and when you talk about juries on competitions, Cannes, things like that, I mean, to define itself as an Australian ad, I think that, you know, there is sort of really easy go-tos where people sort of have this kind of laconic comedy or something like that. And there was a whole era when, you know, if you wanted to be funny and have a funny Australian ad, you sort of just do this. It was almost like you just pull that script out and have you know, blokes on an island being Aussie or something, or to sell, or, you know, like.
I just remember the fellow doing the bomb in the swimming pool, and his wife or girlfriend goes, she's totally wet, and he just goes, what? You know,
yeah.
So it's just so Australian. So you have to, but then the Australian laconic humour has kind of disappeared. People don't necessarily get it. I mean, I can tell some fabulous stories of things that just crack me up that are so deadpan Australian. But if you don't have that cultural background, you go, what?
Mm.
And so that's a tricky one. If you think of meat pies, Holden cars, etc., which we were trying to imbue with Australianism, it was a total rip-off of an American car.
Sure.
You know, so they went, that works, we'll do it here. And frankly, it did.
Yeah.
But that was at a time when, you know, the Japanese invasion was happening, so Australia was getting jingoistic about its motor vehicles.
Audio has the power to light a fire in you. It also has the power to literally went out.
I wonder what's next for Sushi Hub, Stuart. You've mentioned sticking with that jingle, and I love that because I feel like too much of the conversation is often around, are we wearing an ad out versus are we sticking with it for long enough to see results? What's next for the brand?
Well, I don't think it's saturated enough, and we don't throw enough money at it to do that. So we've put a little sort of the jingle sting on some traffic radio things to go in there, just to tie that back into rather than just popping in, which is more tactical. We just put flesh on it because previously I showed you the magazine that Sushi Hub does called Hub. It's a Sushi Hub, so it's Hub. So the magazine comes out twice a year and it's available at all the stores. And if you think of 200 stores, we sit on a fair bit of real estate. So the magazines are there, so we have our own distribution system. There's cybercast images around the place which sell or do whatever we're promoting or doing at the time. So we encompass that as our own outdoor, if you like. Then we do outdoor, and then we are very hands-on. As I said, we run masterclasses for kids. We run masterclasses for corporates. We're available at certain things. Obviously, we sponsored the Japanese Film Festival because it made sense. And it's a matter about putting. It's a very public relations concept. Is that we're putting flesh on the bones. The bone is a brand, and it represents a certain thing, but the certain thing is personal and subjective. So we're leading them by the nose into the things that they are. So if you look in the magazine, for instance, we look at Japanese cultural things and invariably make a comparison with an Australian one. And then, as I mentioned, one of the things there was looked at the matrix concept and the big green screen. That big screen of floating images is actually the creative director nicked his wife's sushi book and used, she's Japanese, and used those images. So it's just like that interesting sort of stuff. And they go, I read it at Sushi Hub, I got it there. There was a reason to go there. We don't do a high level of home delivery. We want footfall so that they'll get that experience. We don't want the experience of somebody who dropped it or came late or whatever it is, or the order wasn't fulfilled. So we want to be in charge of our destiny the whole time. So it is about freshness. It's about sustainability, and to keep driving that. And we push the green footprint big time. We lead the way in that. We started doing things years ago. 8 years ago, we were looking at a solution to the small sushi fish. No one in the world's got one. So, and Adelaide's just banned them. So they've come up with...
You're talking about the little soy sauce packet.
The soy sauce packet, yeah, the squirt bottle, which I found out some people inject their maki rolls with. They jam it in and squirt it full. I went, okay, that's an interesting concept. I'd never thought of that. But... so all their packaging is always cutting edge, always looking for some way to do that. Because
I do that, by the way, Stuart.
You do? There you are. So I've met somebody who does the squirt. Not that the dribble or squirt.
No, just get it all in there.
And then you can get rid of it. Then you're stuck with it. Yeah. See, there's two parts of that, the red and the other part of it. And even in the latest magazine, it's like, it's almost like, do you, they used to do with biscuits, do you dunk? So it's like, how do you do your sushi? Do you mix your sushi with your wasabi? And in Japan, there's an expression for somebody who does that. So, we sort of, it's vaguely
do you know
educational.
that expression, Stuart?
No, I've just cauterized it. I wrote it and then instantly forgot it.
He who inserts sushi into roll.
Oh no, there's no rule for that, but there is a word for the process of mixing your sushi, your wasabi with your soy.
Oh yeah, right.
Because traditionally you don't. You have them separately. And this is the whole concept where you go, oh, yes, it's Japanese street food. And when you think you've got Greek street food, you've got Italian street food, you've got whatever. Japanese has street food, but you buy it in the street, then you go somewhere to eat it. You don't walk down the road eating it, where, of course, in Australia we do. And so Sushi Hub is very, very conscious of what works and what doesn't. So maki rolls are one of the biggest sellers. And if you like, they're today's Chico roll. You've left one hand free. Like the Americans eating with one hand, you've got your gun hand free. So you can go to the sport, you can clap with one hand or whatever you need, and you can hold a maki roll.
That's so interesting.
Now it's your phone hand, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, true.
Why, you mentioned that you got into audio because it was cheap and you knew that it worked. Why do you think that many brands are still undervaluing or underinvesting?
I didn't say it was cheap. I love radio.
Affordable.
Affordable, thank you, yes. It was affordable. Why don't others? I don't know. I don't listen to what other people might do.
Do you not?
Not really. They can do what they like. I've always done that through everything that I've done. It's like only if I think they're doing a better job, and I know, but I don't think anybody is. And I go, okay, well, that's got legs. Would it be useful for us? And it's, like just from this conversation, I've already thought of something I think we can be doing. But I just think radio it's always been, as I said, theatre of the mind, but it's also my generation and this table's generation. It's pervasive or invasive because it is where you are. And you can have it on. You can't, you can walk around with your buds on and have something playing if you want to do it that way. But generally, that's where I get my. No, it's not where I get my news first. Probably I'm getting my news first on my phone, but then I'm getting it filled in by radio. So I'll listen to radio stations that do give me news, and then I love to listen to radio stations that give me news, and then I like to listen to them, see which one skews the news.
One last question for you both. I'm going to start with you, Stuart, and then I'll finish with Charlton. You've mentioned a bunch, but I'm going to force you to pick one. Favorite jingle or piece of sonic branding?
Do you mean other than Sushi Hub?
Of course.
It's too easy.
Well, I mean, there is nothing currently out there, as I said, other than those stings that you resurrected, but I hadn't considered stings. I think currently Sushi Hub does the job. There was a whole string of them. I like the ones that use existing things like Decoré was a very clever use of one. As I said, Suzuki four-wheel drive. I can remember being with Ray Heggendorf in a Suzuki, and I said, because one of the taglines was, and you buy it for the springs, and I was in the back, and I think, you've got to be joking. I still like the old ones, the Happy Little Vegemites. But then if you look at Mortine, and I love about the thing with Mortine, and that transcended to television. I think it was radio first, then it went to television, and it had Ross Higgins who sang it, and then a couple of years later, about 10 years later, maybe 1980, I think, so it'd be like 30 years later, he's fronting Peebo, hit him high, hit him low, hit him with the old Peebo, and I went, okay, again another jingle, and he's now doing the opposition insecticide, and they were memorable. I mean, but again, television had more cut through. Radio had its cut through, and they used to work them together. That was it, and it was rare that you got print getting to bed with them. And so I don't know if that doesn't really answer your question. You can throw anything.
Those are great picks.
Yeah, and I mean, and the one that still gets me now is Cadbury did that whole thing from the Beach Boys thing. What was it? Wouldn't it be nice?
Yes.
And it was a whole animation. It was all purple, so they were pushing the purple concept. And I can't actually hear the Beach Boys, wouldn't it be nice, without thinking of that ad.
So it worked.
Yeah.
Charlton, favourite jingle or piece of sonic branding?
Yeah, I mean, I think if Stuart's covered the jingle side for this discussion, I'm going to go with the sonic brand that I guess is synonymous for me with great storytelling and the anticipation of sitting down on the couch, and it's the Netflix sonic logo.
Ba-dum.
Yeah, and is it that it is a good piece of sound, or and that it actually imbues their brand into it? Well, it's very matched to the graphic, for one, and they haven't changed their graphic as far as I know for a long time, or if at all. And I guess you've got to have great content, which they do. I watch it a lot, but so I think that the fact that can be so short. And it prefaces things. It never finishes things. I think sometimes, you'll have a commercial and then at the end it'll go duk, and, on the Renault car ad or whatever might come on always at the end. The fact that it's an anticipation that's sort of imbued with getting the popcorn out, sitting down, obviously these days, wherever you are watching a screen, but it's like, that's, and you let it play, try and skip through it. It's short, but it's a great setup. And I guess it's been so successful because, Netflix, as far as I could see, led the way in terms of sort of that streaming service. Just, when I remember seeing an article saying there's, $3 billion of investment going into this thing called Netflix or something, and everyone's jumping on board. And I was like, what is that thing? And what's it going to mean? And what is it going to be? But, someone had a clue early on that was going to be very important to them, and it's still the test of time. If they change it tomorrow, will that be okay? I mean, probably, because the brand is so strong that if they just had that, and then again, it's the repetition, isn't it? If you're watching at least something a night or a series you're binging. It's like, there it is, over and over and over again. But I guess watch this space, see if they have the bravery to change it. But
a bit like the MTV logo.
Exactly. Yeah. It's that Pavlovian response that you can't put a finger on, but there's science behind it, and it just works.
Another great pick. I love that point around it being anticipatory as well. On that note, Stuart, Charlton, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
If you're a brand looking to connect with Australians, there's no better place than Aussie Radio and Audio. It reaches more than 15 million people every week and truly is where brands are heard. Head to cra.au to get started. See you next time.